Hello there friends and welcome back. As I've mentioned in my recently released The Best Arcane Buff Spells guide, this is a follow-up to that guide, so we'll now focus on the remaining arcane spells, so debuffing, crowd control spells, and also direct damage offensive spells for great single target and area of effect damage. So let's just jump right into it. First with debuffing and crowd control spells, starting with Level 1. The best one by far is certainly Grease. I have said this many times, but Grease is the best of the early level spells, and it is such a powerful spell that it can actually last you through the entire game. That's how amazing Grease is. Grease actually has, it's such a stacked spell that it has a lot of benefits. First, it is a lingering spell with a 1 minute per level duration, and it does force the enemy to save against it every single round, so very effective. Second, it is an area of effect spell, so capable of hitting multiple enemies at once. It does have friendly fire as well, so beware because you don't want your characters to be caught in your own grease. But you can overcome this by later casting Freedom of Movement, the Divine buff on your characters, or also the Selective Metamagics feat, so that it only works on enemies. Third, it is not affected by the enemy's spell resistance at all. So all of the annoying demons you face that have high spell resistance, who cares, just cast grease. They cannot avoid this because of their spell resistance. 4, we have the actual spell effects. Every round the enemy has to make a reflex saving throw or fall down to the ground and become knocked down. Knocked down by itself is one of the best of the crowd control effects in the game. A knockdown enemy will not only lose their actions for the round, so they can't do anything, they'll also take a massive -4 penalty to their armor class against melee attacks. So perfect for all of your melee characters who can easily hit the enemy now. And it is also one of the reasons I recommend your casters, even full wizards and sorcerers, to have a backup rich weapon from martial weapon proficiency like a glaive, because they can cast grease and then just attack the enemy after they get knocked down. And because of the penalty to armor class, even with your low attack bonus as a wizard, you can easily hit them. Lastly, if the enemy survives your attacks after they were knocked down and they manage to save against the grease, they will attempt to get up and resume their normal actions for the round. However, getting up will proc an attack of opportunity from all of the nearby characters that threaten the enemy, so they are probably going to explode when they get up. Believe me when I say that Grease is so powerful that if I were to say your caster character, all they have to do is cast Grease while devoting all of the other spells to buffs, and that is actually the most optimal way for any crowd controller caster. That's how insane Grease can be. For the early and some of the mid game at least. Remember that for all of your low level spells, you can actually increase the difficulty class by using the Heightened Metamagic spell. Color Spray can also be another useful debuff and crowd controlling spell. The problem is, there's not a point to casting this instead of Grease. The same for Sleep, because overall Grease is a much better spell. I mean, Sleep can be used, so it does have a hit dice cap though, and a lot of the demons you fight, even in the early game, have high levels, so you won't be able to hit many of them with this. Sleep even has a full round casting time, which is annoying, as opposed to Grease, which is just a standard action. So honestly, trust me and go with Grease, you can't go wrong with it. Alright, so now let's talk about the best level 2 Arcane Debuff and crowd control spells. The main one here is Glitter Dust, without a doubt. Just like Grease, it also bypasses the enemy's spell resistance and is also an area of effect spell. The best part is, if the enemy doesn't make the will saving throw, they will become blind. Blind is a very powerful debuff that gives the enemy a 50% miss chance on all of their attacks, and also highly reduces their armor class. Lastly, it even lets you bypass enemy concealment, so great overall. So for the early game, you certainly can just get by spamming Grease and Glitter Dust. You don't really need anything else besides buffing spells. And it also just happens that both of these extremely powerful spells are of the Conjuration school, which is why I always recommend you start with Conjuration Focus and Greater Focus, that you can later apply to your other school of choice through the aid of the Expanded Arsenal Mythic ability. Besides it, we have Create Pit. I mean, the Pit line of spells can be useful, but just like with Sleep and Color Spray for level 1 spells, there isn't much of a point to casting Create Pit instead of Grease, or most importantly, for level 2 spells, Glitter Dust. The benefit of Create Pit is that it can actually remove some enemies from battle if they manage to fall inside the pit by failing a reflex saving throw. For characters that like poison spells, and Stinking Cloud is one of them, Pernicious Poison is also a very powerful debuff. Honestly, the main reason is that it doesn't have a save. You just cast this, and the enemy takes a -4 penalty on save against poison. The downside is that all of the demon enemies are immune to poison by default, but you can still use this against some annoying cultist enemies and other enemies that aren't immune to poison, like most of the human enemies in the game. If you cast this and then Stinking Cloud, your chances of getting the enemy to become nauseated are basically 100%. I suppose some players might also consider Web a great spell. Once again, the main issue is that I would much rather be casting Glitter Dust instead. Web can have its uses in that it has a very high area of effect and can make the enemy stuck inside the web so they won't be able to move, which turns them into sitting ducks for your ranged characters. And also the less enemies you have attacking your party members, the better. Now let's talk about the best level 3 Arcane Debuff and Crowd Control spells. Honestly, for level 3 we don't really have that many. The best one overall is Stinking Cloud. This spell was basically a game breaker in Kingmaker. The only reason it's not as powerful in Wrath is because it is a poison spell, and the most common enemies, demons, are all immune to poison. What this spell does is, it is a lingering spell just like Glitter Dust, and Grease also bypasses spell resistance, and if the enemy fails a Fortitude saving throw, they will become nauseated as long as they remain inside the area of effect, and also for 1d4 plus 1 rounds even if they leave the cloud. So a very stacked spell. Nauseated enemies can't do anything, they can only move. So you basically shut them down with just this. The main issue, as I said, is it won't work against demons. I suppose Slow can have its uses. It only affects enemies after all, but does have spell resistance. If they fail the save, they will become staggered so they can only attack once, losing all of their other attacks, and also take a penalty to attack rolls, armor class, and reflex saving throws, and even reduce their speed. Or if the enemy already has the haste buff, this spell will counter that, dispelling haste. Besides these two spells, Ray of Exhaustion can also be useful because it works even if the enemy passes the save. It is a Ray spell with a ranged touch attack that has a Fortitude saving throw. If the enemy fails the save, they will become exhausted, which means a massive -6 penalty to strength and dexterity, and they can also attack only once. Even if they pass the save, they will become fatigued instead for -2 to their dexterity and also strength. For level 4 debuffs and crowd control spells, the best one here overall is Enervation. It is a ranged touch spell, so you do have to fire a ray and roll to hit in order to get to the enemy. And it can inflict up to 4 temporary negative levels, 1d4. The best part about this spell is that it does not have a saving throw at all, so if the enemy is not immune to negative levels, they will always be hit with them. Negative levels are actually very powerful debuffs. Each negative level gives something like -1 to attack, most especially saving throws, and negative levels do stack as the description itself states. Combine this with Metamagic Rods, for example, for the Maximize spell, and you have a raid that can drain the enemy of 4 levels right at once, for a massive saving throw and attack bonus penalty, and this even reduces their hit points as well. I believe you can actually combine Metamagic, so for example Maximize and Empower, to drain the enemy of even more than just 4 levels. And it is certainly why I have Ember in my How to Build Ember guide pick this spell. And we also have Phantasmal Killer, of course, which is one of the 2 instant death spells that we have in the game, as far as normal spells. The enemy has to roll first a will saving throw, and if they fail that, they then have to roll a Fortitude saving throw. If they fail both saves, they will be instantly killed, just like that. It is actually very easy to stack your Phantasmal Killer difficulty class to the sky by getting lots of bonuses both to DC and also to the enemy debuffs, and I already have a guide linked to the side here on how to properly debuff the enemy, so you can easily instantly kill them with Phantasmal Killer and later the weird spell, even on unfair, even against the Demon Lord bosses and other late game bosses. A perfect spell for an illusionist like Nenio. As for the best level 5 Arcane Debuffs, Cloud Q, well, it is a great spell, especially for Kingmaker. Unfortunately in Wrath, just like with Stinking Cloud, it is a poison spell, and most of the demons, well, all of the demons actually, are immune to poison by default. And by the time you get this spell, you're still at chapter 3, but even then, for the enemies that aren't immune to poison, you're far better off casting Stinking Cloud instead of Cloud Q. If you are on Kingmaker though, be sure to go for this, because you can actually stack both Cloud Q and Stinking Cloud, and they do work together, because Cloud Q will reduce the enemy's constitution without a save, and the lesser their constitution, the less fortitude they have, which makes them prime targets for Stinking Cloud, which targets fortitude. Feeble Mind can be useful as well, but it has somewhat of a niche use. It can basically block spellcasting enemies from casting spells, especially wizards or sorcerers who take a massive -4 penalty on their saving throws. Will saving throw, that is. I suppose if you have an enchantment character, you might also consider Hold Monster, but there are better spells than this. And if you are an evocation focused character, you can use Icy Prison to paralyze enemies on a failed saving throw. Phantasmal Web can be decent as well. First, it only affects enemies. It works the same as the web spell, but has another bonus to it. So if the enemy fail a will saving throw, they will get stuck in the web, just like the normal web spell. Except they also have to make a fortitude saving throw every round after that, and if they fail, they become nauseated, meaning they can't do anything. The problem is, as far as I'm aware, the nauseated effect from Phantasmal Web is treated as poison, unfortunately, even though it's an illusion spell. I'm not sure why it's coded that way in the game. So, you know, it's not going to be useful against any of the demon enemies. And now we also have Mind Fog, another very powerful debuffing spell for enchantment characters. If the enemies fail the save, they will be hit by a massive -10 penalty on their will saving throws, thus making them prime targets for your other will spells. And all of the enchantment spells basically target will. Even if they leave the cloud, they'll still get hit by the penalty for 2d6 rounds. The only downside is that this does have friendly fire, so be wary not to hit your own characters with this very annoying penalty. For level 6 debuffs and crowd control, Chains of Light is great. Like most of the conjuration spells, it bypasses enemy spell resistance, so you don't have to worry about that. Also, if they fail a reflex saving throw, they will become paralyzed, meaning they can't really act at all. This spell does have a save every single round, but the unique thing about it is that because it targets reflex, and whenever you paralyze the enemy, they take a massive penalty to their dexterity score. If you hit the enemy once with the spell, they are basically doomed to keep failing the reflex saving throw, because they will take a massive penalty to reflex. A perfect spell to use against demons. Dispel Magic Greater is another great dispelling spell. Basically the ultimate of the dispelling spells besides some mythic abilities. It's the same as Dispel Magic, except it can actually dispel multiple spells when casting the single target version, which is the one you should use. This does have an area of effect version, but it's kinda wimpy, because it only dispels a single effect from multiple characters. This spell used to be a lot better before, but it was actually nerfed in one of the patches. Or you could say it was made to have the same effect as the tabletop version. It does actually have a limit to how many effects you can dispel. I think it's something like 1 per 4 caster level, so a maximum of 5 at level 20, something like that. The good thing is, failed dispel attempts will not count towards this limit. So let's say the enemy has 10 buffs. Because it does require a check to dispel the enemy based on your caster level against their caster level, some buffs you'll probably not be able to overcome. But only the buffs that you actually dispel will count towards the limit. Besides that, we also have Sirocco, a very infamous spell from the Kingmaker days. It has friendly fire, so be wary of that, but this spell deals very good fire damage, 46 points of fire damage plus 1 point per caster level, so that's 46 and around plus 20 at the max level. And if they fail a saving throw, they will become prone, so they'll get knocked down. And from Greece we all know how powerful knockdown is. Also, if the creature takes damage from Sirocco, they'll become exhausted if they're already fatigued, or fatigued if they aren't. Now let's see our Sirocco in action. Notice how huge the area of effect is. So we can actually empower the damage. Something like, 60 damage on average per Sirocco tick, and we can have multiple ones besides the fact that it's, a lingering spell. So very cost efficient because the enemy is going to be affected with it on every single round after. Let's see if we can stack it multiple times, since we can cast this spell a lot in just one round because of our demonic rage aspects, or just by having quicken spell. So yeah, that's another Sirocco. The Gallo here has been knocked down. The other enemies are immune because they are winged demons. For some reason the Gallo has wings, but it's not immune. Some of the demons are like this in the game. And we should be able to quicken now for another Sirocco. So that's 3 Siroccos in one round. One was a move action, the other a standard action, and this one a swift action. Yeah, so we got another Sirocco as well. So more procs of Sirocco after the round has started again. And even more procs. So honestly, it's one of the most fun and best spells in the game. It's a prime target for the selective metamagic spell feat, so that only the enemies are hit with your Sirocco, and of course Ascended Element Fire mythic ability, so every enemy will take the full fire damage, which is pretty respectable for a per round effect. I suppose there is also Phantasmal Putrefaction, which can help if you are an illusion based character like Nenio. It only affects enemies, and it has 2 effects. First, if the enemy fails a will saving throw, they will take 1d4 points of wisdom damage, which only happens once. Each round after that, they'll get another will saving throw, and if they fail that, they will instantly fall asleep, which basically turns them into sitting ducks for your characters, especially for using the coup de grace ability that lets you one-shot sleeping enemies. Even if they wake up from damage they take, they'll still have to keep making further will saving throws. So it's a lingering spell, always great. The only pet peeve I have with this spell is that the actual benefit of it, the sleep effect, only occurs a round after you cast the spell, which is somewhat annoying. I would rather use a spell that you know already deals the most powerful effect in the same round you cast it, like the ever so useful Sirocco. Bite is another debuffing spell that has a unique use. The main benefit is that it lets you sicken the enemy without a save. Sickened enemies take -2 penalty to their saving throws and attack rolls, which is great. Also, using this spell only costs a swift action, so before a tough battle you can pre-buff with bite, and then when battle starts, use a swift action to sicken the enemy without a save to reduce their saving throws, and then in the same round still cast another powerful debuffing spell. For level 7 arcane debuffing spells and crowd control, honestly they're kinda disappointing. You are far better served using level 6 spells or other spells from earlier levels through meta magic like Heightened Sirocco or Selective Sirocco, which makes it become level 7, Grease, Glitter Dust. All of these other spells are better than the level 7 debuffing ones. I mean, I suppose you could make a case for Hold Person Mass, but you know it only affects human characters, humanoids that is. It won't work against demons, so who cares? If you were going with enchantment, you are far better served by just using Confusion with the aid of meta magic to turn into a level 7 spell. For nice level 8 debuffing spells, well, we have the greater version of Bestow Curse that can actually double the penalty from it, so -8 to attack rolls, saving throws, and skill checks. That's a very powerful debuffing effect. The downside is, as far as the last time I tried, this wasn't working properly. It was still applying the normal curse bonus, so instead of twice, we were still getting just -4. Death Clutch is kinda situational. I really wouldn't bother with this. I mean, if you are a Necromancer, you are probably a Lich, and as a Lich you'll have way better Lich spells to instantly kill the enemy or deal damage. And if you are another caster, you can just use the illusion spells for instant kills, or the very powerful damage spells like Hellfire Ray and Sirocco for actual damage. Don't bother with this. Now let's talk about level 9 arcane, crowd control and debuffing spells. Well, if you are an evocation character, you can use Mass Ice Prison to paralyze all of the enemies, although I don't find it that useful for a level 9 spell. The best one here is certainly Weird, which is an area of effect version of Phantasmal Killer, so the enemy has to roll twice. If they fail the save twice, they will be instantly killed, just like that. The good thing is, even if they fail the Fortitude save, so the second save, they'll still take some very minor damage, but most importantly be stunned for 1 round, which is great. Stun enemies can't really do anything. But you know, with a difficulty class based character, you're just going to one-shot all of the enemies with this. Even on unfair if you're properly prepared. Like Phantasmal Killer, it is a mind affecting spell, so if the enemy is immune to fear, they will be immune to weird. However, you can bypass this immunity by just using the very powerful Grandmaster's Rod. And if you are an enchantment focused character, you can also make use of Mass Hold Monster. It is a lot better than Mass Hold Person because this actually affects every single enemy in the game so long as they are not immune to paralyzation. And it also only targets enemies. Paralyzed enemies really can't do anything. Alright, so let's talk now about the best arcane damage spells, so the offensive spells. I'll be blunt, damage spells aren't really that great in games like Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition and Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, because, you know, damage spells require a lot of proper preparation to actually take off and inflict heavy damage. In the early and a lot of the mid game, they aren't really going to be that special. For example, take the most famous of all of the mage spells, I think, Magic Missile. It can be a good spell that fires a lot of missiles that each deal 1d4 plus 1 points of force damage. And force is great because there is no resistance or immunity against force damage. The problem is, let's take your level 1 character. So you want to be a damage caster, and of course you're going to pick Magic Missile. The problem is, in the early game, it only fires a single missile for 1d4 plus 1 points of damage. That's nothing to the enemy's hit points. So it's kinda worthless in the early game. On the other hand, if you were to cast something like Grease, you would be able to hit all of the enemies, possibly knocking them down, and also keep forcing them to save or become knocked down again, every single round for 1 entire minute of real time, assuming you were just level 1. So I don't think it needs any saying when it comes to which one is more effective, considering your castings and spell slots are limited. When you actually get 5 missiles at level 9 is when it becomes pretty good, especially when you combine it with meta magic like Empower, Maximize, and also Quicken to cast 2 magic missile spells for, let's say, 10 magic missiles per round. As I said, damage spells can be good, but they do take a lot of setup. Don't expect them to be powerful or useful in the early levels of the game. But anyways, magic missile is always a great choice. Shocking Grasp is something that you would only pick if you're going for a Magus that has melee attacks and can combine them with melee touch attacks. This spell is very bad for a normal caster because it requires a touch attack and you don't want to be in melee range. Snowball can also be a decent level 1 spell. Unlike Magic Missile, because it is a conjuration spell, it does bypass the enemy's spell resistance and also has scaling damage. It starts as 1d6, which is nothing, but becomes 5d6 at caster level 5. And even has a debuffing effect of attempting to stagger the enemy if they fail a fortitude saving throw. For level 2 damage and offensive spells, the best one is certainly Scorching Ray, because it is a spell that actually scales into the late levels, so at the start you get 1 ray that deals 46 points of fire damage. However, you get an additional ray for every 4 levels beyond the 3rd, to a maximum of 3 rays at level 11, so that's 2 rays at level 7 and 3 at level 11. It is a ranged touch spell, so it does require an attack roll, and because of the attack roll, it can actually critical. Any spell that requires an attack roll to hit the enemy and deal damage can deal critical damage as well, unlike other spells like, let's say, a Fireball, which has no roll to hit, only a saving throw, and also benefits from any sneak attack source you have, only for the first ray though. You can't apply sneak attack multiple times to your ray spells. The other level 2 damage spells don't really compare to Scorching Ray. As for great level 3 damage spells, well, Battering Blast is actually a very powerful spell, and I don't think many people realize how great it can be. It's a ranged touch spell, much like the ray spells. It can fire a bunch of spheres to deal multiple damage to the enemies. So you fire 1 sphere for 1d6 points of force damage per 2 caster levels for a maximum of 5d6, except for every caster level you have beyond level 5 you gain another sphere. So that's around 4 spheres at level 20, and I do believe this is uncapped for characters that have higher than 20 caster level, like Liches, and each one of these spheres will also proc a combat maneuver bull rush check to push the enemy away from you, which can let you proc attacks of opportunity with your other party members that are already close to this enemy. The damage is also force, which cannot be resisted. Now we do have Fireball, and I know it's one of the most famous wizard spells, but you know, it's a very underwhelming spell. I don't know what to say. The damage isn't that good. It has a maximum cap of 10d6, which is very low. It does also have a save for half. It's fire element, which is easily resisted. Overall, it's a pretty weak spell, unfortunately. You also have Lightning Bolt, but it does suffer from the same limitations as Fireball, especially because demons are all immune to lightning, electricity damage that is. It also has a very low cap, and the line targeting is actually a lot worse than Fireball, which at least has a decent area of effect. For great level 4 damage spells, Bone Shatter is one of them. Well, it does have a cap of 15d6, but that's still pretty great. Also, the enemy can roll against Fortitude in order to only take half damage, which is somewhat annoying. But on the other hand, if they fail the save, they will become exhausted for 1 minute per caster level, and even if they pass the save, they'll still become fatigued, so overall a nice spell. You always want spells that have positive effects, even if the enemy makes the save. And now I know this is a debuffing and crowd control spell, but I kinda forgot to talk about it in the correct section, so here it is, Confusion. If you are playing an enchantment-focused DC caster, then you might also consider investing in Confusion. Overall it has a great effect, it can hit a lot of enemies at once, and if they fail the will save, they'll have to roll at least 100. And then the spell works in a different way depending on the roll, but most of the times they will either stand there doing nothing, or attack the closest target, which can also be another enemy. Bestow Curse can also be another decent debuff. It does have a will saving throw, but if the enemy fails the save, well, they will be hit with a crippling debuff, and you can actually choose the version of the curse you want. The best one is certainly Curse of Deterioration, because the enemy will then take a massive -4 penalty to attack rolls, and also saving throws. even ability checks and skill checks too, so great for tripping the enemy. As for level 5 arcane offensive spells, honestly we don't really have anything worthwhile. You have damage spells like Acidic Spray, Cone of Cold, and Fire Snake, but they are very underwhelming. They have a low damage cap and the damage is not great at all. I would rather slot my level 5 spells with earlier level spells like Battering Blast or Scorching Ray through the aid of meta magic such as Heighten and Empower or Maximize. Now as far as damage spells for level 6 arcane, well, the best one is certainly Hellfire Ray, one of the most infamous spells in the game because I do believe this is the spell that lets you do the highest single target damage outside of Mythic spells. Hellfire Ray is simply amazing. You can fire 1 ray plus 1 additional for every 4 caster levels beyond level 11, so that's 1 ray at level 11, 2 rays at level 15, and 3 rays at level 19. Each one of these rays deals a massive 1d6 points of damage per caster level, to a maximum of 15d6, so at the end game you have 45d6 damage from just a single spell, just crazy good. Especially because you can empower this through meta magic and even cast it twice per round with the aid of Quicken spell, and if you are a demon character you can actually cast it 3 times per round. Anything will just be deleted with the spell. It is still a ranger touch spell, so you do have to hit the enemy, but because it targets the enemy ranger touch armor class, it's pretty easy to hit them even as a caster, after we apply all of our buffs. Half the damage is fire, so it does help to have the Ascended Element mythic ability, and the other half is unholy, which is often not really resisted. If you want to delete bosses and other powerful single targets, just spam Hellfire Ray. And I'm using part about this spell is that it's actually an evil spell, but there's no consequence whatsoever in the game when casting it with a good aligned character like poor Ember, at least as far as I'm aware. For a fun fact, in the tabletop version this spell will actually doom the soul of any enemies you kill with it to hell, so yeah, that's why it's evil. But you know, most of the times you're killing demons and other evil enemies, who cares if they go to hell? They would probably already go there or to the abyss anyways, right? Now Sirocco, as I mentioned before in the debuffing section, can also work for nice damage, because it does a hefty amount of lingering damage. Chain Lightning can be a fun spell to use as well. It affects enemies, you basically choose a single target, and it deals 1d6 points of electricity damage for a maximum of 20d6. Because the damage is electricity, you will need Ascended Element Electricity if you want to hit demons who are all immune by default. And after hitting a single enemy, the lightning will actually change to secondary targets equal to your caster level, for a maximum of plus 20, so it's always going to hit all of the enemies. And the best part is the secondary bolts also deal as much damage as the primary bolt. It does have a reflex saving throw for half damage though. I do recall there was a pretty neat synergy between this spell, Chain Lightning, and the Azata Zippy Magic ability, so you could hit all of the enemies twice with this spell for huge amounts of damage. Besides that, you have both Circle of Death and also Undeath to Death. They work in the same way except one targets living enemies and the other targets undead. For creatures with more than 9 hit dice, so higher than level 9, which is pretty much everything you hit with this spell, because you can only get it at level 11, they will take 100 damage if they fail the save. The issues I have with this spell: first, it has a level cap, it can only hit up to 20d4 worth of hit dice. And second, 100 damage at this point is not really that good. You can just delete the enemy with Hellfire Ray instead, at least for a single target. For great level 7 Arcane Debuffs and crowd control spells, well, Finger of Death is a choice, but you know, unlike its glory days in Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition, this cannot instantly kill the enemies anymore. It just deals damage. If the enemy fails the Fortitude saving throw, they will take 10 points of damage per caster level, which can be high. And if they succeed, they still take a little bit of damage as well. The problem is, at this point, you might as well just cast, you know, Phantasmal Killer to instantly kill the enemy. And use meta magic so that you can slot it in level 7, such as for example Heighten and Persistent spell to force the enemy to roll twice. Of course, if you don't care for illusion and want to be a necromancer, then you can always use this spell for damage. You are much better served by, for example, using Hellfire Ray and through meta magic slotting it in your level 7 spells. As for level 8, Stormbolt is actually the only worthwhile of the level 8 damage spells, at least in my opinion. It only hits the enemy, so perfect, has a great area of effect, and also deals 1d8 damage per caster level, which is somewhat unique. Most spells deal only 1d6, 1d8 is a very hefty upgrade over that. and can even stun the enemies for 1 round if they fail the fortitude saving throw, which also halves the damage. The only issue is that, well, it's electricity damage, demons are immune to this, so you'll need to get Ascended Element Electricity, or convert it somehow, for example through the Devouring Lust Metamagic Rod. Besides that, you also have Polar Ray at level 8, but you know, at that point you are much better served with just Hellfire Ray, and slot it in level 8 spells through the aid of Metamagic. As for level 9 damage spells, honestly they aren't really that good. You have Wail of the Banshee, which just like Finger of Death does not instantly kill anymore, instead it deals damage, up to 10 points per caster level. I suppose if you are a lich who has very high caster level, you can use this for example 300 damage to all of the enemies. But you know, the spell has Friendly Fire, and if the enemy passes the save, the spell does nothing, so it's kinda disappointing in my opinion. Most characters will only be able to deal a maximum of 200 damage, which isn't really that good for the endgame. You can deal way more damage by combining other damage area of effect spells with Metamagic Rods. Just with other spells level 9 damage spells are far better suited for early spell levels that are enhanced through Metamagic. If you were to ask me, I do believe the level 9 spell selection is somewhat disappointing. We are missing very powerful spells like the classic Time Stop, and even some other good spells from Baldur's Gate, for example, like Chain Contingency, a far stronger Shape Change. I don't know why they decided to limit this to previous forms. By default, the Shape Change spell actually lets you become more powerful forms, like for example, Powerful Outsiders, Wail of the Banshee, which doesn't instantly kill anymore. It's kinda disappointing besides buffing spells. I do hope we eventually get more powerful level 9 spells added to the game. Alright, so this was it for my best debuffing, crowd control, and also damage arcane spells guide. My next video is most likely going to be the best divine buffs, so following the same style of this guide for the best divine buffs, crowd control and debuffing spells, and also damage spells. Please be sure to comment down below if you think I missed a certain spell that you really enjoy. After all, there's quite a lot of them to talk about. As usual, if you found this guide useful, then please remember to support the channel if you can by liking, subscribing, and even becoming a member to access some exclusive perks. Thank you for watching and see you next time, friends.